Hello, and thank you for the introduction, Derek, and hopefully there's still a few people left in the room to hear my talk about the nuances of the electric vehicle battery market and our outlook over the next 10 to 15 years. Just as a quick introduction, so I work for BNEF, which is a part of Bloomberg. So we do research and news into everything around the energy transition. We have analysts across the whole world. As you can see, these are our main offices where we cover regional analysis as well as global analysis. And I'll be looking at some of the global trends and also where Europe fits into that. I work in the energy storage space. In particular, I look at battery technologies. This is a particularly interesting topic with respect to EVs because EVs are a large share of battery demand. But as BNF-wide, we cover everything to do with the energy transition with respect to solar and wind, storage. We have markets in advanced transport, looking at electric vehicles, intelligent mobility and robo-taxis, things like this. We also have buildings and industry, and we're building out our research to look at agriculture and land use. So we cover everything to do with the energy transition. With respect to passenger EVs, as a lot of people have discussed already, the market has been growing significantly, and we expect that to continue to happen out to 2025. And there's a lot of regional breakdowns with respect to this. So we're obviously here in Europe, and Europe is leading the trend along with China as one of the key markets. If you look at the chart on the right here, Europe and China have the highest share of electric vehicle sales of new cars. And we expect that to continue out to 2025, where they'll be reaching almost 40%. And this is really important, as I think it was Emma or Aoife who was speaking earlier, saying that once an EV share gets beyond 20%, it expects to sort of take off, and you no longer need subsidies, and it really starts to sort of become a significant share of the market. You can see that there's a global trend which we're expecting to hit approximately 22 to 23% by 2025, which is similar to where places like Korea, Canada, and the US are. And then there are sort of emerging markets which have a little bit more work to do with respect to growing their EV shares. With a growing EV share, there is of course growing battery demand, and this is sort of my expertise. And as you can see, since 2020, only 2 years ago, that battery demand has more than doubled. And out to 2025, we expect to see it double again. And out by 2030, we expect to see it increase by fivefold from where it is today. And that's really important because this is, as was discussed on the previous panel, this is an industry where we need raw materials, we need physical things. These supply chains are complex. The chemical processes are also complex, and there's a lot of IP and experience which is sort of very regionally focused, and I'll discuss that on the next slide. But whilst we're here, I just want to focus on the fact that the growing share of the increased demand of batteries is largely down to a very, very significant growing share of passenger EVs. And whilst this is a global outlook, if we break this down by region, and Europe's relatively similar, so some regions like India, for example, have a significant 2 or 3 wheeler market, but passenger EVs very much driving that demand in Europe. As I said, these supply chains are complex, and at the moment, in 2022, global battery manufacturing capacity is very much focused in China. So 77% approximately of current capacity is in China, and that's been great whilst up until recently, when China started to have lockdowns, which has slowed down their exports. Raw material shortages as well are also impacting this, and different places around the world are sort of hoping to diversify this and localize supply chains. So in the US, for example, the Inflation Reduction Act is something that is very significantly driving up their local manufacturing capacity. But even out to 2025, based on companies' announced nameplate capacity for their factories, whilst China does lose some market share, the global capacity is going from about 1 terawatt hour of battery manufacturing capacity to over 5 terawatt hours of manufacturing capacity. And so whilst they lose some market share, China is still growing rapidly. Europe is increasing their share slightly, as is the USA. There's also been some discussions already this morning about about range, and one of the key metrics with respect to increasing a vehicle's range is the energy density, so the amount of energy you can store in a given amount of mass or a given amount of space. So that's something which has increased significantly since 2010, and we've seen the average numbers move from around 100 watt-hours per kilogram to around just under 200 this year, and companies like Goshen High-Tech and CATL are saying next year they'll be producing cells which will maybe get into 250 watt-hours per kilogram. So you can see really driving this improvement. And that's something which I think will be very welcome among electric car drivers and certainly the marketing sides of car companies being able to say that their ranges can increase and people won't have to charge quite as often. And another, as I said, supply chains have been very disrupted over the last couple of years, and this has led to some change in the types of batteries. So the green in this chart at the top is lithium iron phosphate, which is a cheaper chemistry, but it's got a lower energy density. The bottom of this chart has the nickel-based chemistry. So in blue, you've got nickel manganese cobalt oxide, and this in 2019 was one of the leading chemistries. It has a higher energy density, but it contains materials such as nickel and cobalt. And in the yellow, you've got nickel cobalt aluminium oxide, which is a similar chemistry to the NMC, the blue. And you can see that this has changed quite a lot since 2019. And one of the key reasons for that is a couple of years ago, 2019, 2020, cobalt prices became very expensive, and there was a significant focus on the ethics around mining these materials, which typically come from places. I think the Democratic Republic of the Congo has a lot of the natural resources, and there was a focus on whether or not child mining was used in these materials. So companies have looked to reduce their reliance on this expensive and ethically questionable material, and we've seen, as you see, the sort of the darker blues, which we see continuing in our forecast out to 2030 and 2035, are mixes of these chemistries with a reduced amount of cobalt. But something we also saw around 2021 and this year is nickel prices become very expensive. So when you reduce cobalt in the NMCs, you typically increase the amount of nickel you're using. And if nickel prices become very expensive, and this has been driven largely by the war in Ukraine, as Russia is one of the exports approximately 20% of the world's nickel, this is where LFP, despite its lower energy density, has really come in, because companies like CATL and BYD have developed this technology and increased the amount of energy density that they can get, and as you saw in the previous chart, that was increasing. But also it doesn't contain nickel, it doesn't contain cobalt, and therefore as it becomes more favorable as those commodities increase in value. And as and something that we've seen in a decade-long trend since we've been tracking these battery prices since 2010 is prices decreasing year on year. We do this analysis every November or December, so we're currently going through it again. And I don't want to surprise everyone too much to say that this is going to probably be the first year we see prices rise. And in a month or so's time, we'll have an updated outlook. But at the moment, this is our latest research, and it showed that prices have continued to drop. And on average, as volumes of batteries around the world have doubled, prices have dropped on average 18%. 18% for every doubling. And if we look at how that continues out to the future, we are hoping to see prices hit the $100 per kilowatt hour price, which is largely considered to be parity with ICE vehicles in the not too far future. Another caveat to this is there's obviously been significant inflation this year, and this is based on real 2021 dollars. So that would have to be considered as well when looking at these numbers in today's market. And this is how our forecast from the previous slide matches up with company targets, whether they be sort of announced or sort of our inferred targets based on their announcements out to 2030. And largely our forecast is sort of through the middle of what automakers and cell manufacturers are expecting battery pack prices to cost. Of course, there's a number of different ways people can reduce their costs, and as I said, we're sort of being relatively optimistic about prices reducing despite commodity prices being high. And Volkswagen earlier this year spun out their company PowerCo to manufacture all of Volkswagen Group's batteries globally. And with that announcement, they put in a few cost-saving measures that they expect to achieve once these factories are operational later in the decade. And this is just how sort of we interpreted that. So you can see that if they start making their cells in-house, they can reduce any margin that they're paying if they're making them themselves with improved cell design. So they're planning to make all of their cells in a single cell format and standardizing that. So they're expecting to reduce their costs on this saving as well. As I said a couple of slides ago, LFP has become much more favorable, and a few years ago, none of the Western automakers were really discussing using it. Volkswagen is one of a number of Western automakers, including Tesla and Ford, who have recently made announcements saying that they'll change their chemistry to use cheaper materials, and there's a significant cost saving there. And also with Volkswagen's standardized cell design, they're able to standardize their pack design across all of their models as well, and they're hoping to make some savings there. I've also put in this chart sort of what we've seen since mid last year. If we account for the commodity price increases based in the nickel and cobalt and lithium prices, how that price might increase. So without those price increases we've seen, you might get to $60 per kilowatt hour based off last year's average price. And with those price increases, maybe more closer to $90 per kilowatt hour if Volkswagen are able to realize all of the cost savings that they're hoping. With respect to cost savings, the other side, as I said, the commodity prices have been very volatile, and lithium iron phosphate is largely driven. The cost of lithium iron phosphate is largely driven by the cost of lithium. The other materials in this battery chemistry are relatively cheap. And if we look at the price of that over the last 18 months or so, we've seen that it sort of peaked earlier in May this year, and it's stabilized and come down a little. So there are some sort of short-term bumps in the road with respect to prices, but our long-term view is that commodity prices will even out, and economies of scale will continue to reduce costs. When we do our annual cost analysis, we also try and break this down with respect to different segments, and this is really interesting because the cheapest battery packs that we saw last year were the e-buses and commercial vehicles in China. And this is largely due to a couple of things I've already discussed. So China has a lot of the manufacturing capacity. They also have approximately 97% of the demand with respect to e-buses. They have a really good policy and really good uptake of e-buses, and they also have a lot of the mining and refining capacity. Battery electric vehicles also have a lot of capacity, and these prices are also relatively low due to the amount of these vehicles that we see in China and that part of the world. And then other segments like e-buses outside of China and fuel cell electric vehicles are significantly more expensive, and this is due to the low volumes and more expensive chemistry choices that people are making elsewhere. We expect people in the West to start using the cheaper chemistries, and as volumes increase, we expect to see these prices sort of level out and become more similar. Just finally, with respect to cost savings, so this is also based on cell prices from 2021, so this year's inflation would have to be taken into account for the prices, but with the solid-state battery chemistry technology companies developing at a rapid rate, we expect to see this entering the market around 2025 or 2026, and this is just one of a number of technologies that we think that might help continue to reduce the cost of battery packs for everybody. Thank you very much, and I think you can finally go and get your cup of coffee now, and if you want to grab me for some questions, yeah, that'd be great.